Hello everyone, this is Joshua Smith of Apollo's Artifacts. We are in mid-January of 2022. And as you can see, I have a huge number of news articles to get to here today, so I'm going to jump right in with this. From the Gateway Pundit, Justice Department creating specialized unit focused on domestic terrorism due to so-called growing threat of anti-authority ideologies. So that's a warning to all of you out there with your Gadsden flags. It's a warning to anyone who's a paleo-conservative. It's a warning to anyone who, like me, is a small L libertarian. It is a warning to Christians who don't just fall on their knees and worship government like leftists do. So let's see what it says here. The Justice Department is creating a unit focused on domestic terrorism. Assistant Attorney General Matthew Olson testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee on Tuesday on the threat of domestic terror. Olson said that he had created a specialized unit focused on domestic terrorism due to a growing threat of anti-authority ideologies. Of course, Olson isn't talking about Black Lives Matter terrorists or Antifa terrorists who rioted and caused over $2 billion worth of damage and murdered somewhere around 33 people. Of course, you don't hear that from the mainstream media. And it says here, we have seen a growing threat from those who are motivated by racial animus. Of course, that's just something that they charge. They just say that, they claim that, they throw that out there. As well as those who ascribe to extremist anti-government and anti-authority ideologies. Now, when Trump was in power, it was fine to be anti-government and anti-authority. In fact, they embraced it regularly. They thought that this was a wonderful thing. But again, once the left is in power, they do the same thing that they did when they were in power in the 1990s under Bill Clinton. If you'll recall, back when Bill Clinton was in office, everything was concentrated constantly on so-called domestic terrorism. But it was always focused on white people, so-called white supremacist groups, and so on. And you could find the 2-hour and 43-minute series of hearings here. I'll have that link below if you want to sit through that drivel. And I have a whole slew of articles that are from the Daily Mail, so I'm not going to identify all of those as such as I go through it. They'll all be linked below, of course. I'll begin here with this one. Steve Harvey claims he would not be able to film a new comedy special because of cancel culture. Political correctness has killed comedy. And I actually find Harvey quite hilarious. The 64-year-old comedian who is promoting his new comedic courtroom series claimed that he could not even film a stand-up special out of fear of offending too many people. He blamed the current state of fearfulness among comics on political correctness, claiming it has killed comedy. He says, we are in cancel culture now. Nobody can say anything he wants to. Chris Rock can't, Kevin Hart can't, Cedric the Entertainer can't, D.L. Hughley can't. I can go down the list. The only person that can say what they want to say on stage is Dave Chappelle because he's not sponsor-driven. He's subscription, referencing Chappelle's controversial specials on Netflix. And Harvey is 100% correct here. Next, I have this. Wokery will be the death of Hollywood. Mass dumping of white male writers in favor of women and people of color will end in class action lawsuit, showrunner warns as popular shows tank. White men are being pushed out of the screenwriting business in favor of hiring white women and people of color, according to Barry Weiss's Common Sense blog. And this isn't just according to, we all know this is what's happening. It isn't a mystery what's going on at all. I know a lot of very talented people that can't get work because they're not black, Native American, female, or LGBTQ, one veteran producer said. A shift toward wokeism has also stifled creativity as writers tread carefully to avoid offending viewers, the piece contends. Now, of course, they don't care about offending white viewers. They don't care about offending Christian viewers. They don't care about offending conservative viewers, but it's only their woke left little cult that they worship that they're afraid to offend. The article begins here. Growing emphasis on diversity in Hollywood will be the death knell of show business as white men are cast aside for minorities in a trend that's likely to end in a sizable lawsuit, Entertainment Insiders warn. A shift toward wokeism pushed by the Academy Awards and left-leaning networks has stifled creativity as writers tread carefully to avoid offending any viewers, according to an article by LA-based writers Peter Kiefer and Peter Savitnik, published on Barry Weiss's Common Sense Substack. And Barry Weiss, you'll recall, is the lady who did the big report on the intellectual dark web. She was ran away from the New York Times because she was not sufficiently left enough. As once popular shows such as the Sex and the City reboot Tank, one showrunner shared a series of emails that detailed how women and people of color applicants are getting preferential treatment. Of course, this is just affirmative action. This is what it does. And the more fully you implement affirmative action, the more you are going to destroy the entire industry of any industry where you do this kind of thing. Because the only emphasis should be on entertainment. It should be on creating a good quality product, whatever that product happens to be. It doesn't matter who it is that's making it, but when you obsess about that, then you destroy it. And as we can see here, even the far anti-cop lunatic Quentin Tarantino, who is, of course, a fantastic filmmaker, says here to Bill Maher, who also has been stepping outside of some of the left-wing parameters lately, he said, ideology trumps art. Ideology trumps individual effort. Ideology trumps good. And that is what you get when you get leftists, because they are completely, totally obsessed. And because they do not believe in an afterlife, right? Because most of them are atheists, this world is all there is. Therefore, they put all of their energy, all of their efforts into obsessing about controlling this world. That is why they are obsessed with power over everybody. I moved down a bit in the article here to where it says this whole diversity thing, it's about money. It's good business to tell more stories from different perspectives, and that's all this really is. But that's actually not true. The more woke a product is, the more woke a movie is or TV show is, the more likely it is to absolutely crash and burn because viewers don't like it. They hate it, in fact. The reason that the most recent Spider-Man film has been outrageously successful is because they don't cram woke down your throat the entire film. In fact, there's rarely a political commentary taking place in that film at all because people don't want it. They're not interested in it. They don't like it. And here's another headline about the same topic. Hollywood will barely dare whisper it, but the woke revolution that has driven out white men and ensures that every production is ideologically sound will kill the entertainment industry. Because this is just like communist China and just like Russia when it was the Soviet Union. Everything had first to be ideologically sound before it was anything else, which is what caused it to be an empire of lies. And you cannot run anything on nothing but a series of lies. And of course, that's all that leftism ultimately descends into, contradictions and lies. But rather than lamenting all this, as these two articles do, what people should do is look at this as an opportunity to create an anti-Hollywood, a counter-Hollywood. There's plenty of talented people out there who could do it. The equipment to do it now is so much cheaper than ever before. You have handheld tiny cameras now that are better than anything that they had in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even 90s. So then the only thing that's really lacking is the budget end of it. But there's ways to overcome that as well. I'll move down a bit here in the article where it says this. Of course, Hollywood, like many industries, does have a clubbiness about it, and pretty much everyone in the inside insists it should open up to those who had for decades been kept out. The heavy-handed mandates, the databases, the shifting culture in which pretty much all white men were assumed to have gotten their jobs because they had the right tennis buddies or zip code or skin color, raised the possibility of a new kind of clubbiness. And of course there is some truth to that. A lot of that stuff was done on the old buddy system, but now it has created a new one. Some call it reverse discrimination, but I just say it's blatant discrimination. We spoke to more than 25 writers, directors, and producers, all of whom identify as liberal, meaning leftist, and all of whom described a pervasive fear of running afoul of the new dogma. This was the case not just among the high command at companies like Netflix, Amazon, and Hulu, but at every level of production. And this is why basically every commercial you see now has LGBTQ plus in it. It has interracial couples constantly. It has mixtures of families that don't even seem to make any kind of rational sense. You'll see a black woman with a white man, and then they'll have like a group of 3 or 4 kids, and one of them is an Asian, another one's a Hispanic, and you're like, what is going on here? I mean, are these kids adopted? Or are they just guests at the house? You don't even know what's going on. They don't explain it to you in the commercial. You just look at it and you go, okay, I don't know what's going on there. Doesn't look like any family that most of us know. And then, of course, all of the pro-vaccine commercials, they're almost always done with black people. They've black-faced all of vaccines, and the entire COVID hysteria. And I'm not real sure what the motivation for that is, because it doesn't seem to be working, because the black population is still the least vaccinated. But that is a topic for my other episodes, and I can't talk about that much more on this one. I'll move down a bit further here where it says this. Another writer who, like most of the writers we interviewed, was afraid to speak openly for fear of never working again. They said, "I get so paranoid about even phone calls. It's so scary. My close friends and my family are just like, don't say anything. It is one of those things, will I be able to sleep at night if I do say anything? Getting jobs in this town is so hard, and I'm very grateful to have a great job. If there's any so-called ding on my record, that would just be an argument against hiring me." Just spot checking a bit of this as we go here. It says, from another person that they interviewed, he added that the human resources departments at the studios and streaming services are awash in complaints directed at white male showrunners for simply doing their job. And of course it is, because that's what human resources departments live for. It's what they encourage. It's the only thing they want to happen. They love the complaints. It says here, "It's gotten to the point where I won't give notes on a script any longer to a woman or person of color." And that's why the quality is totally collapsing. That's why so many of these shows are absolutely atrocious, and it's why their ratings are imploding. And good enough to them. You're going to turn out a junk product? Well, screw you. Good riddance to you. I'm certainly not going to watch your trash. He went on to add that the culture of documenting even the slightest of slights makes him anxious. "I'm sitting in a room trying to run a show with a collection of people I don't totally trust." And of course you can't trust them. You can't ever trust them, because these people are looking to take you out constantly. They're full of hate, they're full of rage, and they're insane on top of it all. And he moves on down here to show Exhibit A of what they're talking about, a show called Woke, which is absolute garbage trash. The comedy series, not funny at all, which premiered on Hulu in September 2020, should have been the statement on America right now. It's about a black cartoonist who has awakened to systemic racism after a run-in with cops, as if white people don't have tough run-ins with cops. Have you ever watched any of the First Amendment auditors to see how cops treat them, regardless of what color they are? Obviously you haven't, because you're just a victim of constant indoctrination that only black people are treated bad by cops. No, cops have rotten attitudes 90% of the time. Most of the time they're very poorly trained, they don't know what the laws are, and they think that they're emotion or feelings enforcers. They come out to jump all over anybody just because somebody called and said, "Oh, I have a complaint about something." Well, your job isn't to respond to just complaints, it's about the law. So it continues here. The show started off on the right foot. The showrunner, Aisha Carr, in the writer's room she oversaw, delivered a strong batch of early scripts, according to several writers on the show. Then the producers weighed in. The notes were all so sanctimonious, one writer said. "It was never supposed to be as serious as it was. We wanted a thought-provoking show that made fun of woke culture and explored notions of what a black artist's life would be like in San Francisco among white liberals." Oh, you mean people who would just fall down on their knees and worship everything you say and do because that's what woke white leftists do? You think we don't know that? Do you think we're stupid? Look at the hellhole that San Francisco is right now. The homeless are allowed to literally take shits in the streets. They have a poop patrol to clean up the shit from these heroin and drug addicted homeless people who are all over that city. And then it talks about how a writer was replaced here by Jay Dyer, of all people. No, not Jay Dyer of Jay's Analysis, but a black Jay Dyer, who apparently is an absolutely atrocious writer, because it says here the quality of the scripts then began to suffer, and the show, which premiered in 2020, landed a 53% green splat average audience review on Rotten Tomatoes. I'll move down a bit further here where it says the fear one prominent director said in an email is, "The audience stops trusting us. They begin to see us as a community twisting ourselves into a pretzel to make every movie as woke as possible. Every relationship mixed racially, every character sexually fluid, and they decide that we are telling stories set in a fantasy land." Yes, left-wing fantasy land. That's it, the leftocracy, right there. That's exactly what it is, because they live in the minds of leftist professors who have started all this garbage, this inane idiocy, instead of a world they know and live in. If that happens and they decide to throw themselves instead into video games 24/7, we will lose them. But of course, they're after the video games too. The left leaves no stone unturned. Movies and shows that were once widely acclaimed but are now verboten, writers and directors said, included Blazing Saddles, even though it was co-written by Richard Pryor. The Bad News Bears, even though it featured a multiracial cast. Tootsie, because transgender activists. And Rocky, the bad guy, cannot, in all caps, be black, a director explained. And that's why in commercials, whenever they show a thief or a robber or something like that, they inevitably show them as a white man, because someone will be offended because trunk. And I move from there to this in the American Thinker. Why are Caucasians vanishing in TV commercials? By Jacob Fraden. Commercials take up 27% of commercial television screen time and are the main source of income for TV and radio stations, which of course is all dominated by Big Pharma, by the way. Big Pharma is always the biggest leader in the money. That goes for magazines as well. Anyway, the article continues here. In most cases, advertisements on all channels appear simultaneously. So don't try to change the channel. There will be commercials everywhere else too. Nowadays, they have also taken over the internet. For financial support, websites have to run ads on their pages, the largest share supplied and controlled by Google, of course. Ads pry into your eyes, unceremoniously interfere with text, and on YouTube, in the most inappropriate places, they cut into the action. Films, lectures, concerts, tearing apart musical performances. There's no escaping commercials. We've grown accustomed to them, and they've become almost a part of our lives as much as food, toilets, and sleep. In the United States today, the white population, not including Hispanics, is 57.8%. In real life, Caucasians are still in the majority, but now on TV and the internet, they are swept under the rug like trash. Blacks comprise 14% of the U.S. population, but appear in 50% of commercials. White actors now appear to promote health insurance, gold, loans, and some medicines. Moreover, if a white person appears in a commercial, he or she is usually old, sick, a freak, or at the very least, an appendage to a black partner. If there's a doctor on the screen, he's usually black, while the patient is usually white, and of course dopey and stupid, or extremely tiny, short, skinny, or horribly obese. Caucasian young men appear in only 4% of the commercials. If some aliens began to study the population of planet Earth through our TV commercials, they would have a somewhat distorted picture of Americans, to put it mildly. And here they show a typical example of recent commercials. So why do advertisers ignore the long-standing rules of marketing and to the detriment of their own financial interests? Well, it's because of ideology, as we just covered in the previous two articles. The answer is simple. At the heart of this nonsense is political correctness in a form even Orwell couldn't have foreseen. Business executives go out of their way to publicly show their conformity with the universal diversity and critical race theory, CRT, demanding that the white man be blamed for all the sins that one can imagine, replacing ancient, long-vanished oppression of blacks with real oppression of whites, overcompensating and planning racism in reverse. But isn't racism in reverse? It's just anti-white racism. That's what the left loves right now. Why does the white population, which is still in the majority in the U.S., accept the banishing and belittling obediently and silently? Why is there no public criticism, much less resistance to this idiocy? Why don't people tell political correctness to go to hell? After all, the U.S. is not Stalin's USSR, and anyone who disagrees with a party is not yet sent to a camp or shot, although I'm sure they would love to do that as soon as possible. Why is there such stifling conformity among the American people, formerly known for their independence and freedom of speech? The answer is simple and sad. The reason is fear, albeit on a more vegetarian level than it was under Soviet rule. And the article continues on from there. I'll have it linked below so you can check it out for yourself. Here's another article from the Daily Mail. Horrifying footage emerges of young women being groped or actually raped in public by a huge mob during New Year's Eve celebrations in Milan. Attacks mirror the infamous Cologne 2016 sexual assaults. Of course, they will not identify who did that, what group of people did that, where they came from. Again, because of fear from the leftist mob. And the leftist mob doesn't care to sacrifice these few pitiful females to the hordes because they worship the hordes. The video shows two young German students trapped against security barriers. With nowhere to go, the pair are seen shouting across the barriers for help while the men grope all over them, tear their clothes, and then reportedly attempted to rape them. At least 9 women in total were victims of these assaults. Italian police investigating the attacks carried out raids on Tuesday after 18 suspects described as, quote, foreigners or, quote, Italians of North African origin were identified. Of course, that means they're the border crossers, the so-called refugees. In the British media, they often refer to them as Asians. And here you can see some of the video as they scream and cry out in horror, and they are clearly being abused in front of everyone. And those are just some of the joys of diversity and inclusion and equity. Women are always made to suffer, but the left doesn't really care about women. Next, we have this. South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem announces crackdown on indoctrination in schools and introduces bill to prevent a political ideology, protests, or lobbying being forced on students to push back against critical race theory. Thank God for that. Every state needs these bills to stop this garbage. It says here the Alternative Social Studies Learning Plan has students participate in real-world civic engagement like attending demonstrations or lobbying for a cause. Now, of course, they make that sound all simplistic, but what that means is you get an A++ or bonus points if you go out and say that abortion is absolutely wonderful. But it doesn't give you any points if you go out for pro-life rallies, because the left is obsessive. And can you imagine how far behind this country is going to be in actual STEM-related fields in just a few years as we do this absolute ignorant, asinine garbage compared to what they're doing in China and India and all these places that are already blowing us away in mathematics and physics and engineering and everything else that it actually takes to build a society, build a civilization, win wars. This whole place is going to crumble and fall because they're constantly obsessed with where people place their genitalia and what color their skin is, because that's the left, totally obsessed with sexuality and genitals. Then I move over to this. France moves to ban incest for the first time since 1791 after a series of scandals. And as we move down in the article here, what you see is that crimes including incest, blasphemy, and sodomy were removed from the French statute book in 1791 as a legacy of the French Revolution, removing Christian-inspired morality brought on by the Ancien regime. But of course, that's another beautiful, wonderful legacy of the left there, the bloody French Jacobin Revolution. Next, we have this. Terrifying footage shows Mexicans running for their lives as drone controlled by Jalisco New Generation cartel drops bombs before being shot down. So now we're having drone attacks from the drug cartels. Let's watch this. I can imagine that some future terrorist attacks are going to happen this way as well, and assassinations. Of course, the problem is we won't be able to know if it's a homegrown sort of thing or was it actually our own government, because they can't be trusted at all. Next, we have this. U.S. consumer prices soar at fastest rate in 39 years. Real wages continue to tumble for the 9th consecutive month. So wages are decreasing, prices are increasing, and let's go, Brandon. Yeah, I agree. And that is from Zero Hedge. I'll have it linked below, originally from a Bloomberg report. Next, we have this. Rhodes Scholar who claimed she grew up poor and in a foster care loses her scholarship after officials have learned that she grew up in a middle-class family with a radiologist mother and attended a $30,000 a year private school. And almost predictably here we can see that she is an associate of AOC, the complete lunatic, who has a similar background to her and also lies about her own background. But see, the system incentivizes this kind of behavior. It says here that she presented herself to university officials as a queer, low-income, first-generation student. Well, when you give unfair advantages to those kinds of people, then you're going to have people who come in and pretend to be that. Next, we have this from the Gateway Pundit. Trojan horse candidate waging war on conservatism in Alabama. And you always find these kinds of sneaky little rat candidates running around in Alabama and Mississippi and Tennessee. They always try to fool the voting public. So they'll pretend to be a rock-ribbed conservative or whatever, but secretly behind the scenes they're working with these leftist organizations like More Perfect Union. And as it says here, they use buzzwords like healing the nation, we need to be more united, we're fighting against attacks on our democracy, which of course means our leftocracy, easing partisan tensions and combating political extremism, by which they mean Trump. Next we have this shocking moment. Gang of 9 robbers armed with sledgehammers take over Bay Area shopping center and order terrified occupants to the floor before stealing $110,000 worth of jewelry. Well, why don't you just hand it over to them, since California doesn't care about laws against thieving and burglary and shoplifting anyway? Just go ahead and hand it over. It says here that it was the latest in a series of smash and grab attacks throughout California that critics blame on justice reform initiatives and soft on crime approaches to misdemeanors. And this is all manipulated and controlled by Soros and the DAs that he has put into place. But again, it's ultimately leftist voters who are to blame for all of this. And unfortunately, they do deserve to continue to suffer the consequences for their bad ideas. They have nothing but bad ideas, and these are the results of those bad ideas. Homicides all over the place, robberies all over the place. That is leftism. And it says here, Eric Orozco, is this guy a YouTuber? Whose store Heart of Gold was targeted in the heist, said he lost between $50,000 and $100,000 of merchandise in this robbery alone. And here we have some lovely video of this insane psychotic attack here. Here from RT, we have this. Veteran BBC presenter quits over, quote, diversity drive. The presenter of Radio 4's show called Quote Unquote said he resigned after feeling forced to book diverse but unsuitable guests. And again, this is all about just watering down quality so that you can hit a series of check boxes, which is what they've been doing in TV commercials and TV shows and movies for years. It's all about hitting the check boxes and no concern or consideration at all with the end product, whether it's good or not. So the article begins here. Nigel Rees, a BBC presenter for 46 years, has revealed that he resigned because he was unhappy with the corporation's constant demand for, quote, diversity. Claims he was often made to invite certain guests as a box-ticking exercise. That's exactly what it is. He says here his show was constantly being interfered with by people above him who wanted to push their diversity agenda. You mean their diversity, inclusion, equity obsession, because leftists are always obsessed. We had prescriptions to have diverse groups and disabled guests. I didn't agree with it at all, but I went along with it because I had to. It came from upstairs and it seemed to be a general priority, he stated. Rees claimed that the BBC's objectives often led to difficult situations in which the guests knew that they had been invited in the name of diversity alone. I am not willing to go on having my choices interfered with in order to tick boxes in the name of diversity and representation, Rees told the Sunday Times. It is difficult having it enforced for the sake of it. It is also patronizing, not least to the people who don't want to be on because they feel they are ticking a box. But that's what it is. They are all only being patronized because it's the obsession of the left. Rees said that he felt his autonomy decline in recent years, having once had the ability to invite whom he wished onto the show. The BBC increasingly interfered in guest choices on the grounds that they could be offensive to the audience. Some tiny little percentage of the audience is going to be offended. In a further example of this encroachment on his autonomy, Rees said he was asked not to mention certain lines from Noel Coward's 1932 comic song, Mad Dogs and Englishmen. The BBC feared it would promote colonial attitudes. Well, you were only the greatest empire of the seas in the history of the world, so why would that by definition be evil to have a colonial attitude, even just mentioning it in a comical song? This is absurdity. Next we have this from the postmillennial.com. Andy No's lawsuit against Antifa moves forward in legal victory. Boom, update on my lawsuit against Antifa. Oregon Court of Appeals denied defendant Benjamin Boland's request to stop the lawsuit from being amended. Stay tuned for updates. And here you can see a typical leftist nutbag lunatic here, probably a violent a-hole to boot. The article says here, defendant and appellant Benjamin Boland, an Antifa extremist, accused of assaulting No at a Portland May Day riot in 2019, had appealed a limited judgment denying his special motion to strike and sought review of the trial court's order granting motion for leave to amend his complaint. According to No's lawsuit against the Antifa group's violent attacks on the reporter in 2019 while he factually reported on political events in Portland, Bolin allegedly punched the Post-Millennial's editor-at-large in the abdomen with his fist, causing No significant pain and emotional distress. Aside from violently assaulting the renowned journalist, Bolin, a former student at Portland State University, of course, brain toxified by leftist psychotic professors, has a history of violent behavior because that's the type that they like to draw in. That's the type that Antifa and Black Lives Matters thrives on. Mentally ill, mentally deranged, violent, lunatic leftists. So that is a bit of good news there. Next, from the Gateway Pundit, we have this. Now even the far-left media is reporting on the grocery crisis and empty shelves Biden across the nation. And I've seen so many empty shelves lately, it's absolutely stunning. It's just unbelievable. And I'll, of course, have this link below so that you can check it out for yourself. Next, from Natural News, food shortages of meat, eggs, poultry, other commodities are worsening in the U.S. as supermarkets face supply chain disruptions. And again, here we see yet another picture of totally bare shelves. Next, from Zero Hedge, we have Department of Justice creates specialized unit for domestic terrorism amid attempts to dub January 6 worse than 9/11 by Tyler Durden. From the beginning, the Biden administration has clearly prioritized the threat of, quote, white extremism as the prime and most pressing domestic security concern. For example, in June, issuing the White House's National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism, which defined the two most lethal elements of today's domestic terrorism threat as one, racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists who advocate for the superiority of the white race. Have you heard anybody advocating this insanity? I've not heard this stuff. But they've been saying this ever since the 1980s. It especially ramped up in the 90s under Clinton. There were all these reports put out by the SPLC and the ADL constantly saying that white racism and white supremacism and white nationalism is on the rise. And every year they would come out with a new report saying it's on the rise. But wouldn't by now it be at literally infinite levels if it was on the rise every single year? And two, anti-government or anti-authority violent extremists such as militia. And again, I don't know of any militia that says that they are violent extremists who want to take down the government. That's just ludicrous. And if you do ever hear that, it's probably 99% odds it's a Fed. All of those places are always ran by Feds, and they always have people from the SPLC involved too. And there's always a bunch of leftists in general running around in there. And that goes back to Elohim City with Timothy McVeigh back in the day. And as someone points out down here, a Sean Davis, does this new FBI department exist to prevent domestic terrorism or to perpetuate it? Like that time the FBI hatched a plan to kidnap and kill Michigan's governor. Yeah, and of course all of these things are just FBI orchestrated. Never trust the Feds, folks. And finally, we have this from Natural News. HBO now pushing racist, bigoted, critical race theory as a central theme in its broadcast shows. And I think, as I mentioned before on here, Lovecraft Country was just completely overloaded with anti-white hatred, full of complete lies, historical lies, preposterous lies about being a white person during that time period. It begins here. Any chance they get, the filth that runs Hollywood takes the opportunity to prop up black people while denigrating white people, and the HBO show In Treatment is no exception. In it, a large black woman named Brooke plays the part of an angry, condescending psychiatrist of color who lectures an effeminate, straight white man named Colin about the evils of having pale skin. This tired, highly racist theme has become a mainstay in American advertising, TV shows, and movies. This is a central theme of this episode, by the way, obviously, where black people are portrayed as the smart, respectable majority demographic alongside dumb, wimpy white people, if any white people are even portrayed at all. Anyway, In Treatment plays on every anti-white stereotype that you can imagine, from the piercing violence in the eyes of the angry, overweight black woman to the pathetic race pandering of the self-loathing, libtarded-looking white man to whom she is talking down. In the show, Brooke is also portrayed as having a white white boyfriend. Big shocker. Despite hating all white people and especially white men, you can pretty much see the violence in her eyes while she speaks of white people. No self-respecting white person would pay even a dime to support anything coming out of Hollywood right now. One of the episodes depicts Brooke clarifying herself about some previous statements she made in a previous episode that may have been misconstrued as demonstrating value in white people. Brooke makes it clear that whites have no redeeming value in her eyes, and that's one of the same things that comes out in Lovecraft Country also, and that the horrific inequality in the United States is not the result of white people being more driven to work and succeed, but rather because white people have benefited from centuries of dominance. But of course, how did they get the centuries of dominance? Did that just magically appear? If you're saying something like that exists, then that something has to come from something. It doesn't just magically manifest. And of course, all this stuff is being orchestrated today by the elites of the planet, almost all of whom are the super wealthy whites who belong to the Bohemian Grove and the Bilderberg Group and the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations, the Atlanticists, and so on. They're the ones who are doing this to play one group off against another, because as long as we're divided, then you're never looking up at who's actually controlling and manipulating everyone. And you can call them the 13 bloodlines of the elite or the Committee of 300 or whatever else it is that you think they are, but they're all tied in together. They're all linked through organizations such as Skull and Bones and the previous ones that I mentioned. There's an interlocking membership that goes across the entire planet, and they are above and control all of these corporations. It's all done through the biggest banking trusts in the world. It's all a financier banking elite that manipulates and controls all of the biggest corporations across the planet, which includes Disney and HBO and Netflix and Hulu and Amazon. In fact, most of the big Hollywood studios are owned outright by China through Chinese Communist front groups. Anyway, I'll have this linked below. You can check it out for yourself. And just stop. Stop giving all your money to these huge corporations. Stop giving your money to all these streaming services. Stop giving your money in the theaters. Boycott them to the maximum ability that you can. Because really the only way they're ever going to learn anything is when you cut off their supply line of cash. Next, I'm going to have an exclusive episode about COVID and the COVID vaccines over on Rumble, BitChute, and Brighteon. And if you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you.